So I've put together a list here of games we're going to discuss, and I say we go through it, gentlemen, starting with Lego Horizon Adventures, a game that has been sort of rumored for a while now. It's coming out later this year, it looks like. It is a brand new Lego game, which is not a series I think we typically pay attention to, but this one seems to be developed by a different studio than the traditional Traveler's Tales, and it has a completely different look as a result, because the Traveler's Tales games typically have Lego characters with somewhat realistic scenery, where here it's like the entire environment is made up of Legos, so it ends up looking really cool. But obviously, there's a lot of tech going on here as well, and the whole multi-platform situation. So, Alex, why don't you start us off on this one?
This was a really interesting one. I actually didn't expect this. I remember reading about this like very briefly, but I had forgotten about it until basically a day beforehand. And then I had so many questions as to like, oh wait, it's PC day and date. Oh, who's making this? We've really only seen Traveler's Tales making Lego games for what feels like 20 years. So yeah, very interesting to see it in the flesh here. And they did show it off in an interesting way. First, they start off with like pre-rendered CG that was labeled, by the way, which was good. They show off like what looks like 30 FPS path traced footage of Lego. Then they switch immediately after that little intro segment into what is gameplay recording at 60 FPS. And given this studio, it's a Brighton-based studio. I think they're called Gobo. It looks like a Unreal Engine 5 game. And the reason why I say that is mainly due to the shadow treatment. There's a lot of other hints in there, I think, too. But I think the shadow treatment really reminds me of VSM's. You can see a mixture of hard shadows for close-up objects and softer shadows mixing in with them from further away objects. And when they move, due to the fact that it's like reconstructed, you can see that like stippled look. And that's very typical VSM look. And that's what it looked like to me. So I'm going to guess this is UE5. And it looked really, really good, generally.
Yeah.
Like John was saying, like, it did remind me a little bit of Lego Builder Adventure, which was a completely different engine altogether. But at least it was trying to get that look of Lego, that like plasticky look, as well, mixing in with some like PBR materials and screen space reflections here. Yep. Probably, like the ones that are available if you use Software Lumen based upon what the trailer looked like. I thought it looked really fantastic. What did you guys think, Oliver?
Yeah, I think it looks really good, and I think a lot of that is just the fidelity to materials, because I don't think there's like any elaborate path tracing or anything like that going on here. But they still managed to get the character of the Lego in a pretty good way. Like, there's definitely lots of signs of like SSR in there, just the general look of the reflections. There's like some missing detail here and there. Looks a bit unstable. There's not that much blurring when there's movement either, which is kind of like more characteristic of RT, I think.
Right. Yeah.
But for an isometric game, which this appears to be, I think that works quite well, because you don't actually have a lot of that kind of camera movement that's really going to cause lots of issues with occlusion. But, it looks like a proper Lego game, and I think a big part of that is the fact that they are actually building the entire environment out of Legos, like John mentioned. It's not like those Traveler's Tales games. It's more like Lego Builder's Journey, I think it is.
Yeah, that's right.
But this is much more elaborate than that title in terms of the scope of the environments, in terms of what they're trying to do with it, in terms of like the mechanical dinosaurs. It's just a much bigger interpretation of what that game pulled off back in 2021. So I think that's what's really interesting about this title. And it's all running at what looks like a pretty decent 60 FPS on presumably console target visuals here. So I think that's like really impressive as well. Just getting this in a good form on a console, looking this good with this much scope, it looks really quite impressive, I think.
Yeah, I tend to agree with all that, and I love the way the light, if they're just using Software Lumen here, the GI really helps a lot, bringing sort of this stuff to life, and it starts to really look like little toys running around, which I think is a really neat trick. We've seen that before with Lego's Builder Journey, and to a lesser extent, the Traveler's Tales games. I do think the rise in seeing actual Lego brick-based environments might come down to geometry budgets from the past, because I think doing everything in Lego requires more triangles than you would think, right? Like the density in order to make sure like all those little studs are completely rounded looking.
And like the cylinders, all that.
There's cylinders, studs, there's so many round objects, and everything is like smooth and curved. And I feel like if you don't have the geometry to pull that off, it's not going to look great. And obviously they've gone nuts here. And just from the normal gameplay perspective, everything looks very rounded and very natural. Like it really is built out of these little bricks.
Yeah. Nanite's good for that kind of stuff, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you're right. Nanite and Lego is kind of like a match made in heaven when you think about it. Like it's exactly the kind of thing that it's designed to do. They even have like the soft edges, like they're not like Legos don't have like a hard drop off, right? Like when it gets to the edge of a Lego piece, it's like very subtly like smoothed off, right?
Right.
And they've simulated all of that here. My only real, like Oliver, you said, like, you're right. There's not going to, because of the fixed camera, perhaps occlusion artifacts will be somewhat minimal, but there's still several shots where you see the Lego characters running around and breaking the screen space reflections, which, I mean, I really wish it's nice to want things, but I feel like hardware Lumen Path would have made a really big difference here in terms of overall consistency. But hey, if they're doing all the main UE5 features and they're doing software Lumen and they're doing 60 FPS, I can kind of understand it. The big question mark here, though, comes at the end where they announce that it's coming to PC, of course, but then also Nintendo Switch, which from a marketing standpoint makes a lot of sense, like because it kind of taps into the younger audience. It's a chance to reach Nintendo players that are perhaps, you know, Nintendo players can be of all ages, but I'm saying, you know, there's a large install base of kids playing on the Switch, and this might get them interested in at least one PlayStation IP, although you wouldn't talk about IP with children, I guess. So, but you see what I mean. But I did see some questions regarding the fact that it wasn't coming to it wasn't coming to PS4 at all, which I think kind of suggests to me, though, that Sony themselves have decided they no longer want to support the PS4, right? Like, I think this is kind of showcases a marked effort where they're like, okay, we're done with PlayStation 4 for now. Hopefully. That would be good. And then also there was, I guess, perhaps unsurprisingly, no Xbox version announced, but realistically, I don't see what that would do for them. So it's not really worth it.
It's interesting where there is obviously a number of Xboxes being sold. The fact that it's a PlayStation Studio game that isn't, baseball. There's really, I can't imagine why Sony, like, I'm pretty sure Lego, from the Lego side of things, they really wanted it on Switch. They have a pretty good history of releasing on Nintendo platforms, even Nintendo exclusive games, if I'm not mistaken. So I think that makes a lot of sense. The lack of Xbox is mainly down to the Sony side of things. But, you know, at the end of the day, you're getting this day and date on Switch, PC, and PS5 there. And based upon the fact that this is on Switch, it obviously could run on PS4 or Xbox Series S. So
what's it going to look like, though?
I'm very curious about that. Switch is really old in comparison to the PS5, so
it's tough. I mean, Lego Builder's Journey did ship on Switch as well as all console platforms and PCs, obviously. But I think in that case, you're dealing with a much smaller game built on Unity, and they didn't have SSR on Switch or on tablets or anything like that, mobile phones. But it still looked pretty good. They were just using pretty regular shadow maps there, and it was a smaller world, so I feel like it was able to scale a little bit better onto those platforms. Whereas here you have like, I don't know. I have no idea how this is going to scale. Obviously, you have a ton of reflections, massive, huge reflective world, and then all this complex shadow rendering and the nanite.
Just get rid of it all. Just get rid of it all.
Yeah, I can't imagine it would look too hot, but I guess we'll have to wait and see. I mean,
they can make great looking Lego games on Switch. There's just a matter of how far they're willing to go, and they're going to have to cut out all this advanced UE5 features.
Like how far they can scale this game.
How can they scale this game back? And like, what are they willing to do to the art to make sure that it still looks good without using any of those technologies? To me, though, it seems like kind of a pain on the development side because, you know, if you're using things like Lumen, for instance, that's how you light your world, right? And suddenly, we have to have an alternative older lighting solution as well. So you're basically working with two sets of art. Well, it's, you know, same art, but like you're arting the game differently based on platform, which seems like a lot of extra work.
They actually did that with the Talos Principle 2 on Series S. They had a whole different lighting system.
Really?
Yeah, they had.
I forgot about that. That's right.
Yeah, non-lumen lighting system where they just kind of placed fill lights here and there and relied a lot on ambient occlusion.
How did it look?
So Not very good. But also that was a game that I think is probably smaller in scope than this, probably a lot smaller in scope, has a lot less dynamism in the environments.
Oh, for sure.
Isn't doing anything like this. So I think it's a totally different question as to what they were doing with that title. But I mean, I guess it can be done if they throw a lot of artists at the problem. How well it works out, I'm not sure.
Performance is always the question. The one thing to mention here in regards to performance, it did look like a pretty solid 60 FPS throughout most of the trailer.
It did.
But we did do some counts. I did 2 screens and someone confirmed with me the other one. But it was like internally, it looked like some sort of upsampling was being used to get it to a crisper 4K. But the HUD was counted at 1440p, interestingly. In the shot I counted, and also the gameplay was like a little bit above 1080p, which kind of puts it in the realm of like some of the UE5 titles we've seen this generation. Sometimes they go a bit lower when it's a lot more chaotic, like Lords of the Fallen. We know that goes really low. So we'll see, but I think based upon what they showed so far, it looked really reasonable for a current generation game, especially one that was targeting 60 FPS. And once again, we don't know if this is UE5. I haven't seen any confirmation anywhere.
That's true.
But it does look very UE5 to my eyes. And if I'm wrong, forgive me, please.
I mean, technically they could have leveraged Decima, even though Guerrilla's not the main developer, but they're obviously assisting
Decima
on the project.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Sorry.
Yeah, that's not going to show up on those platforms, right?
Yeah.
That would not happen.
Switch Decima.
That would not happen. So yeah, it's probably UE5. It almost, I can't imagine what else it would be.
Yeah, it would be
there's no other multi-platform engine that supports all those features quite like that, I'd say.
I mean, Unity, but it doesn't look like Unity.
It doesn't look like Unity here.
No.